It's no secret that Logan is the best at what he does. I mean, over the years, the man Wolverine has literally fought everything from monsters to gods, somehow always surviving to tell the tale. He has his impeccable healing factor to thank for that, but as today's video will prove, there are some things that you just can't heal from, especially when your history is as tragic and violent as his. What do you do when the man standing against you is someone who knows you far better than you know yourself? How do you defeat an entity that has haunted you from the shadows your entire life, manipulating you into committing unspeakable acts? Well, that's basically what Romulus is to our angry Canadian Berserker. This prehistoric patriarch of Logan and his kind has existed for ages in the Marvel universe, and in this video, we are going to explore his marvelously thrilling life story. Let's begin. The Hour of the Wolf, Romulus's origins. Despite the pivotal role he has played in numerous events in the Marvel universe, Romulus is the kind of guy who likes to lurk in the shadows. Due to this, he has more than a few skeletons in his closet, and his history might be even more convoluted than Logan's. Thus, the best place to begin would be the beginning. The first time we see Romulus's influence being exerted is in issue number 2 of Wolverine Origin. This comic takes place in Wolverine's past when the X-Man was still a soldier in the Vietnam War. Most of this issue is devoted to a conflict between Wolverine and the White House. The suits decide to send Nuke after Wolverine decides to go AWOL. At the beginning of this story, we are introduced to a particularly remorseful Logan, looking for the men who manipulated him into committing unspeakable acts of horror. We see Nuke's relentless torture at the hands of Wolverine, and eventually, we realize why the soldier hates Logan so much. Meanwhile, we see the Silver Samurai engrossed in a conversation with top researchers from Washington, D.C., who are looking for a strange tool that managed to cut through their armored robot on a molecular level. The samurai solves this mystery by revealing that it was the fabled Muramasa blade that Wolverine was wielding. By the end of the issue, it's quite evident that the government and Logan aren't really seeing eye to eye this time around. It is here that we see Romulus exert his influence for the very first time. As the president's aide, Trevor slips off to the side to answer his phone. We hear an ominous voice on the other end. This is none other than Romulus, who basically declares that all of this is basically his plan. It was he who wanted Nuke to go after Wolverine, and we hear the shadowy figure mutter, "There is no God on earth, but there are devils, and there are angels, and I control them both." Soon Romulus begins to be teased as the next big bad of Wolverine's tale, but things really intensify in issue #4 when even Emma Frost finds her dreams haunted by a shadowy figure. Initially, she mistakes the figure for Wolverine. However, it soon becomes evident that this feral, beast-like entity is something much darker. By the time issue number 5 in the Wolverine Origin Saga comes around, Logan is already being hunted by most of the law enforcement agencies on the planet. Though he was pretty successful at taking down Nuke, Logan now finds the legendary Avenger Captain America obstructing his way. Emma Frost rushes to reveal her dream to Logan, and the two duke it out in a pretty interesting hand-to-hand battle. Wolverine finds himself cornered when Emma Frost, Cyclops, and Hellion arrive at the scene. Despite this, Wolverine refuses to calm down and keeps fighting until Emma Frost uses her abilities to stop Logan in his tracks. Against the other hero's advice, she calmly approaches the enraged Wolverine and tells him about the precognitive dream she had. "They used me," Wolverine whispers. "Yes, they did," Emma answers. "And now they are using your son." This is an astounding revelation, as all this while Wolverine had believed his son to be dead, killed in his mother's belly by the same people who turned Logan into the monster he had become, but assures him that his son leaves. In a black and white panel following this revelation, we see a shadowy figure retrieve a newborn child from her mother's belly. The woman's kimono reveals that all of this took place during Logan's time in Japan. It's clear that this is extremely evident in Logan, even though it took place many years ago. The information puts a stop to Wolverine's frenzied attacks, and he deduces that the only way his son could have made it out alive was if he had inherited Logan's healing factor. Despite the dream, Emma isn't able to figure out the child's whereabouts. But what disturbs her even more is the figure that retrieved the boy from his dead mother's belly. She couldn't even bring this man into focus, despite her telepathic prowess, as it seemed as if the individual literally didn't possess a mind. In his thoughts, Wolverine sees the figure again. He finds the same man towering over him while he lies helpless in a ditch. The man menacingly forbids Wolverine from having any thoughts of his own. After all, he doesn't really consider Logan a man. To him, Logan is just a weapon to be wielded. Wolverine ponders upon all the terrible things and acts he had committed over the years, eventually realizing that they got his son, just like they got him. Then, he tells a story about the woman he was in love with. Many years ago, Logan managed to find some semblance of peace in a small wooden cottage nestled amongst icy mountains. He found love in a woman named Silver Fox, a member of the Blackfoot tribe. One night, when Wolverine returned from work, he found that Silver Fox had been murdered. He found Sabretooth lurking at a local tavern and naturally arrived at the conclusion that it was Creed who murdered his partner. The two fight it out, but this time, Logan loses. Creed carries Logan's limp body across the snow and dumps him into a ditch, the same ditch that we saw in Logan's vision just a couple of pages ago. But this time, it's Creed who stands above Logan, taunting him in his misery. Creed reveals that it wasn't him who murdered Fox, but the townspeople who had grown wary of Logan's presence in their home. So they decided to cut down the only thing keeping him there, which led to Silver Fox's untimely demise. We see the madness return to Wolverine's eyes, and by the time he clawed his way out of the pit, rage had completely consumed him. He finds an axe left behind by Creed and ends up slaughtering the village that killed his love. It's a pretty terrifying sequence, and we see Wolverine give in completely to his animalistic instincts. The massacre continues, and Logan realizes that whoever was controlling him back then would eventually fill his son with hatred, just like they had done to him and Nuke. After all, there's no living with the killing. Wolverine screams out in anguish, and the other heroes ready themselves for another battle. But contrary to all expectations, Wolverine does not fight. He carries the ultimate weapon, the Muramasa blade, over to Cyclops and hands it to him. "This is the only thing in the world that can put me down. Take it," Logan states. Cyclops hesitates for a moment, but is eventually convinced when Wolverine tells him that he is the only man with enough conviction to end Logan when the time comes. Though the two have been longtime rivals in the comics for a very long time, it's genuinely heartwarming to see the respect these two X-Men have for each other. Wolverine leaves Nuke with the heroes and asks Emma to help him with his mental issues. As he's leaving, Emma reveals that Wolverine's son hates him, probably even more than Logan hates himself. As the brooding hero leaves the battlefield, one can't help but be puzzled by the cloaked figure who has been pulling all the strings from the shadows. Fortunately, we don't have to wait too long for the answers. The Immortal Warrior. Romulus' story continues in Wolverine Volume 3, issue number 52, where we find Logan being haunted by strange dreams. The dreams are always violent, and they always feature the Lupines. These creatures seem oddly feral, their canines protruding like rabid beasts, their eyes filled with bloodlust. Also, these figures bear an uncanny resemblance to Logan. In an interior monologue, Wolverine tells us that these visions are much more than dreams, and feel more like extremely realistic flashes of lives that aren't his own. These glimpses seem to be scattered all throughout history. The first few visions were from prehistoric times, but soon they progressed to the medieval era, from fighting saber-toothed tigers to taking on entire armies. The only constant here is the Lupines and their shadowy leader, who towers over the bloody battlefields, guiding his feral soldiers into battle. The soldiers, all Lupines, fight and kill until the entire place is littered with corpses. When there is no one left to kill, they turn on each other in a futile attempt to impress their merciless master. Suddenly, Wolverine snaps out of his vision and finds himself standing in Wakanda. In front of him is T'Challa, the Black Panther, and his new wife, the weather goddess, Storm. The trio towers over Sabretooth, who is being held captive by the Wakandans. Storm begins to tell Logan of a strange discovery they made at an archaeological dig several weeks ago when Sabretooth breaks free from his bonds and, in a truly characteristic fashion, slaughters the guards holding him inside the chamber. Black Panther leaves in pursuit of the criminal, while Storm convinces Wolverine to stand down. Sabretooth escapes the walled capital and ends up in the forest, deep within the wild heart of Africa. Meanwhile, Wolverine realizes that Sabretooth probably has someone who is willing to pull him out of Wakanda. After all, he wouldn't have risked an escape otherwise. As he's running through the trees, Sabretooth chances upon a pile of gigantic bones. While Sabretooth is still trying to make sense of the tusked skeletons in front of him, T'Challa seizes his chances and knocks him to the ground with a powerful blow. But Creed is nothing if not persistent, and soon a bloody battle begins between the king and the criminal. Eventually, Sabretooth finds himself on the forest floor, being pummeled by the Black Panther. However, he wraps his claws around the monarch's neck, and, well, that's sort of the worst position to be in. Many miles away, Wolverine senses the smell of T'Challa's blood in the air. He asks Storm to get him to the battlefield unless she wants to become a widow. After some consideration, Storm gives in, as there's literally no one on this planet who knows Creed's tricks better than Logan. They arrive at the battlefield just in the nick of time, and Logan saves T'Challa by slicing Sabretooth's arm off. The act reminds Wolverine of an event that occurred many decades ago on the streets of Tokyo. In a flashback, we see Wolverine being held down by members of the Hand. We learn from the members of the ninja cult that brutal murders are taking place in their territory. The murderer seemed to target prostitutes specifically, and there seemed to be a strange similarity between him and Logan. As Wolverine makes sense of this revelation, he realizes that the unseen figure holding him down has a strange Italian accent. However, faced with no alternative, Logan agrees to the Hand's demands and soon discovers that it was Creed committing the murder. He catches Victor in the middle of the act, and this seems to be the very first encounter between these two lifelong enemies. It was during this fateful encounter that Logan cut off Sabretooth's arm for the very first time and sowed the seeds of their bitter rivalry. While the duo is still bickering with each other, Storm draws Logan's attention to the skeletons littered all around them. It turns out that this is the same archaeological site that Storm was discussing at the beginning of the story, and there seems to be a pretty ominous connection between their discoveries, Logan and Sabretooth. The answer to Logan's question seems to lie right under his feet. After a brief moment, Logan comes to the horrifying realization that the skeletons accompanying the elephants seem oddly similar to the Lupine soldiers he had seen in his visions. Homo lupus. The next chapter opens with a spectacular image of a white tiger roaring in all its glory. This is another one of Logan's visions, and this one takes place in ancient Rome. Logan finds himself in the Colosseum among a horde of men cheering a gladiator fighting the tigers. Before he can even make sense of the strange vision, Logan snaps back to reality, where he finds Storm and Black Panther sitting at the edge of his bed. They tell him that Sabretoth has escaped, and on top of that, Wolverine has been unconscious for 2 days. In his anger, Wolverine screams out, "It was Wild Child." Just then, someone walks into the room. But before we learn the identity of this intruder, we are taken back to Logan's vision. Here he finds the leader of the Lupines standing at the very top of the Roman Empire. A frenzied crowd screams his name in unison, and, well, it's just who you guessed it was, the fearsome Romulus. With a single gesture, he beckons one of the gladiators to kill another. Then we snap back to reality, where Black Panther explains his new discovery to a confused Wolverine. T'Challa's observations at the elephants' graves seem to directly contradict the idea that all humans evolved from primates. The skeletons at the dig seem to convince the genius monarch about the theory of split evolutionary strand. The archaeological evidence seems to point in a pretty weird direction, and Black Panther explains that other than Homo sapiens, there was another species of primates that came not from apes, but from wolves. Wolverine seems to be completely unconvinced until Black Panther reminds him of all the mutations they have seen over the years, which predominantly contain a lupine component. Wolfsbane, Wildchild, Thornton, and Feral are just a few examples of such mutations. This seems to have quite an impact on our hero, and Logan wanders off to see Sabretooth, who's being held by the Wakandans. Sabretooth seems to be another example of the lupine strain, and he basically taunts Wolverine by reminding him that they are the same. Of course, Wolverine punches him in the face for this, but their similarities are quite undeniable. Wolverine asks Creed one last question before leaving: who is Romulus? As expected, Sabretooth stays mum on the topic, but the dark look in his eyes betrays that he knows more than he is letting on. That night, Wolverine finds himself unable to sleep. The look on Creed's face seems to disturb Logan, as he has never seen Sabretooth so afraid ever before. As Wolverine wanders into the palace's hallways, looking for a beer, he makes another shocking discovery. The guards have all been taken out, and Sabretooth seems to have escaped. Logan uses his sense of smell to track Sabretooth, but even he realizes that the trail is far too easy to follow. In addition to Creed's, there is another scent that seems to be oddly similar to Logan's. While he is still pondering upon this, a clawed hand scratches Logan's face to bits. A dark figure ambushes Wolverine and subjects him to a pretty brutal beatdown. The attacker seems to be stronger and faster than Logan himself, which becomes even more shocking when we realize that this man is none other than Wildchild. Wildchild's strength surprises Wolverine. After all, the guy was never up to Logan's level. Wildchild also seems to have dipped his claws in poison, causing Logan to lose consciousness. In his dreams, Logan returns to the first encounter between him and Creed. He remembers that there was someone else present during the fight. Though he can't see this individual, Logan clearly remembers the scent of his blood, as it is oddly similar to his own. It was this individual that kept Sabretooth and Wolverine from tearing each other to shreds. Just as the realization dawns, Wolverine finds himself back in his bed. We go back to the panel from the beginning of the story, and this time we see who the intruders really are. Standing before Wolverine, Black Panther, and Storm is an ensemble of lupine mutants: Wolfsbane, Sasquatch, Thorn, and Feral. It's evident that they all want to find Wildchild, but this would lead them back to the hell where Wolverine was created, the Weapon X Project. The Battle of the Beasts. Issue number 54 opens with another strange vision, but this time it seems to be a distant memory of Logan's, one where Wolverine and Captain are fighting through a small platoon of soldiers back during World War II. Logan tells us how it was pretty common for him and Steve Rogers to team up during the war, but this one mission in the Italian Alps was a bit different, because this time Wolverine found someone just like him fighting for the Nazis. This was actually Logan's first introduction to Wildchild, though he didn't realize it at the time. As the two lupine mutants stare each other down, Wildchild sets off a hand grenade, which sends Logan flying down a steep incline. As the memory fades away, we hear a quote that has been repeated a couple of times already: "Quod sum eris." Meanwhile, back on the Wakandan aircraft carrying Wolverine's team to the Project X facility, Sasquatch struggles to wake Logan up. When he finally comes to his senses, Logan has a tough time adjusting to the team. After all, he is sort of a loner. However, they decide to work together for the sake of the mission, but Wolverine doesn't seem as hopeful. Perceptive as always, he senses that things are just on the verge of getting really messy. As T'Challa's aircraft finally lands among the snow-capped mountains, the team can already sense that something is off. The airspace seems to be completely clear to the point that they are able to arrive without even a single escort. Wolverine instructs the others to get back on the jet, but of course the headstrong youngsters do not agree. The only one who takes Logan's advice seriously is Sasquatch, who decides to stay by the jet while the others follow Logan into the dark facility. However, Sasquatch becomes the first one to be attacked and finds himself being ripped apart by Wildchild's poisonous claws. The blood seeps into the snow, and we realize that Sasquatch isn't gonna make it. Inside the facility, Logan finds all the terrible memories flooding back and sees the head guy of the facility, the Professor, in a flashback. But where it really gets interesting is when we see a dark figure lurking just behind the Professor, whom even Logan doesn't recognize. He snaps back to reality when Feral gets to him. Their conversation is cut short when they come upon a glowing chemical tank with none other than Sabretooth inside. That's when Wolverine asks Feral how they managed to get their powers back after being depowered by M-Day. Feral reveals that she doesn't actually remember how the powers returned, only that both she and her sister went missing for a couple of days. Wolverine eventually arrives at the conclusion that someone was messing with the mutants with the lupine strain. Not only had he bought Feral and Thorn's powers back, but the mysterious entity had also increased Wildchild's strength. His final victim, of course, was the man before them, Victor Creed. While Wolverine is still pondering these events, Sabretooth crashes through the tanks and rushes at him. It only takes a moment for Logan to realize that there's something terribly wrong with his old enemy. His scent seems changed, more bestial, as if all the humanity had been ripped out of the mutant. Though Logan tries to get Feral to escape, the stubborn mutant stays behind to help. But Sabretooth seems almost overwhelmingly powerful after the experiment, and Wolverine realizes that even Weapon X wouldn't be capable of such senseless cruelty. In an extremely brutal scene, Sabretooth blinds Wolverine with his claws, leading Feral to fight against Creed entirely on her own. As Wolverine struggles to maintain consciousness, we go back to his memories of the Weapon X project. This one seems even more peculiar, as Creed seems to be present at the facility. The professor reprimands Creed for getting too close, but Sabretooth isn't really the obedient kind. Just then, a large fist grabs a hold of Sabretooth's neck and asks him to back off. Wolverine looks at the strange trio standing in front of him, but the dark figure at the back is the one who intrigues us the most. Well, as you probably guessed already, this is none other than Romulus, who now seems deeply connected to the Weapon X project, as well as Wolverine. Though we don't see him directly, it's certain that the man has some pretty rigid beliefs regarding evolution and mutation. We learn that he looks down upon people like Professor X, as he considers their attempts at understanding genetics to be futile. Instead, he believes that Logan is the key to revolutionizing the entire world. Back in the real world, Wolverine's eyes finally regenerate. However, it's already too late. Upon reaching the exterior of the facility, Wolverine realizes that most of his team has already been wiped out. Sasquatch lies in a pool of blood, clinging on to life. He tells Wolverine that it was Wildchild who did this. However, Wolfsbane seems in a state of shock after the brutal attack and can't even get a single word out. Thorn points Logan in Sabretooth's direction, but by the time he gets to the beast, he's already ripping Feral's entrails out. As Wolverine readies himself for the fight ahead, a strange thought dawns upon him. His lifelong rivalry needed to end, one way or the other. Black and gold. The next chapter starts a full day after the massacre at the Weapon X facility. The man standing before Logan now is none other than the leader of the X-Men, Cyclops, the one Logan entrusted with the fabled Muramasa blade. Scott glares at Wolverine, probing him for answers. After all, Logan just showed up at the Summers residence, all blood after his last encounter, carrying the news of Feral's passing. One can probably understand why Cyclops doesn't really trust his teammate at the moment. The reason why Wolverine is back at his friends is because he plans to use the Muramasa blade to kill Victor Creed once and for all. Though Scott is still hesitant, his doubts are cast aside when Wolverine allows Emma Frost to read his mind. Wolverine's memories of Creed are so disgusting that Emma can't really help but puke her guts out. Through frenzied gasps, she beckons Scott to give Wolverine the sword. As Wolverine sets out on his mission, we finally learn what happened the night before at the Weapon X facility. We get a flashback to Wolverine looking down upon Sabretooth as he rips Feral's guts out. Sabretooth senses Logan too and looks over his shoulder. However, there seems to be a look of sheer terror on Sabretooth's face. Of course, that's pretty rare for a true psychopath like Creed. And eventually, Logan realizes that it's not him that Sabretooth is afraid of. Instead, a very familiar scent of fragrant oils fills the air, causing Sabretooth to disappear into the forest. However, when Wolverine turns, there's no one there. Though Logan could have chased Sabretooth down and gotten the job done, he stays behind to take Feral's corpse home. The team gets back into the Wakandan jet just in time, but not before they set fire to the entire Weapon X facility. Though they made it out, the danger that lies ahead is more than evident. On their trip back home, Wolfsbane tells Wolverine how Wildchild led them back to the Weapon X project. It was also Wildchild who unmutated Feral and Thorn. However, the process didn't give them their powers back, just their lupine looks. Wolfsbane also informs Wolverine that Wildchild seems to have a superior, Romulus. Meanwhile, Wolverine finally reaches the mountains where Silver Fox's cabin was once situated. Once more, Logan's memories get the better of him, and a single tear escapes his eye. It's clear that he still grieves for the woman and vows to end Creed for taking Fox's life more than anything else. For the next few days, Wolverine waits. It's like he literally stays rooted to a single spot, meditating, while the relentless snow buries him. Finally, Creed finds him. In a swift motion, Wolverine brandishes the Muramasa, taking Creed's arm off. To the mutant's surprise, it doesn't heal back like the other times. Since the Muramasa is an almost mythical weapon that negates healing factors, Wolverine finds it easy to cut Sabretooth down. However, what's surprising is that even Sabretooth wants the same, as all his humanity has already been stripped off. A single tear falls from his eyes, and Creed whispers, "Do it." Wolverine beheads him in a single slice, and for a moment it seems that the battle is won. Wolverine puts the sword back into its scabbard, only to realize the presence of another man nearby. It turns out to be Wildchild, and he hints at the existence of someone who had already foreseen this brutal encounter between Wolverine and Creed. And then we finally learn something about the man called Romulus, the mastermind mastermind behind most of Wolverine's misfortunes over the years. Wildchild tells us that Romulus is first among their lineage, the one who has watched times change ever since the beginning. He tells us how two special people would always rise to the top of the food chain, one with black hair and the other with blonde hair. This fact has been proven true throughout eternity, and this is exactly what Wolverine was seeing in his dreams. Wildchild reveals that even Wolverine's dreams were implanted by Romulus to clue Logan into his final plan. Romulus revealed these truths because he wanted Logan to know that he was very important to him. After all, Wolverine was the best among the Lupines, the one that had managed to survive everything that had been thrown at him. Needless to say, this enrages Wolverine, who starts mocking Wildchild's blonde hair. But the moment he's about to kill him, an even more ominous presence reveals itself. We see Romulus's silhouette standing behind Wolverine, but by the time he turns, it's already gone. On top of that, even Wildchild seems to have disappeared. Somewhere out in the forest, a dark laugh rings out, taunting Logan. As Wolverine yells out in desperation, one thing is for certain: Romulus's tale is just beginning. The Sins of the Father. Romulus's trail next leads us to Wolverine Origins, Vol 1, Issue 26. Here, Logan has just managed to uncover the secret identity of the son he lost in Japan so many years ago. The boy had been miraculously rescued by a mysterious figure Emma saw in her precognitive dream. However, in the opening pages of the comic, we find ourselves lost in the Tule Lake War Relocation Center back in 1943, which is swarming with refugees from Japan. Wolverine, who was still serving in the army at the time, informs the poor refugees that they have been detained indefinitely. As for the families, their fates would be even worse. After all, the next generation will always be worse than the one before. The flashback ends, and we find Wolverine carrying his unconscious son Daken to a medicinal lake in the lava beds near Newell, California. Wolverine's voiceover informs us that many years ago, Wolverine condemned 4 prisoners of war at this location, and their eventual fates ended up being far worse than death. The place for a secret facility that conducted inhumane experiments on the prisoners, and Wolverine ends up getting appointed as the guard dog. After the experiments were done, Wolverine was tasked with killing all the witnesses, from the scientists to the subjects, in order to ensure that no one ever knew about the experiments. Due to this, Wolverine remains the only person still aware of the lab's existence. As he lays his son Daken down on the platform inside the caves, he wonders why he didn't inherit any of his mother's innate sense of peace. We dive into Daken's childhood back in 1946 Japan, where the kid was found by a kind couple. Since the couple is childless, Daken's arrival almost seems like a miracle, and they adopt Wolverine's son to raise him as their own. The father grows extremely attached to the boy, but the other people around town don't take so kindly to his presence. Due to his mixed heritage, he began to be known as Daken, which means mongrel in Japanese. Daken's repeated encounters with bullies turn him into a cold and remorseless individual who starts taking out his bullies one by one. Despite the murders, Daken's father remains unfazed, and his conventional upbringing instills within the young boy a great desire to become powerful. However, Daken's violent tendencies fill his adoptive mother with a constant sense of unease, who wants the young boy to be sent away. Things only worsen after the woman becomes pregnant with a child of her own. In an act that clearly showcases Daken's psychopathic behavior, he murders his infant stepbrother. Even more shockingly, he does this after being convinced by a book of Spartan history that his brother was unworthy. Daken's father sends him away, and in the ensuing chaos, the youngster's powers come to manifest. We see that he has the same skill set as Wolverine, claws, and a healing factor. By the time the confrontation ends, Daken has murdered both his parents. But right there, lurking in the shadows, watching is his new prospect, is the man who has haunted this entire storyline, Romulus. While Wolverine is still piecing the clues together, he's suddenly attacked by a stray rock. He cuts through the attacker, but is ambushed by another figure who brings down a large rock upon Logan's head. We see several strange creatures emerge from the shadows to draw Wolverine's unconscious body away. When Logan finally comes to his senses, he realizes that he has been captured and bound. Standing before him are the last survivors from the World War II experiments, who strangely recognize their tormentor even after all these years. Things are certainly not looking good for our Canadian knucklehead. Daken's path to war. The surviving experiments inside the volcanic facility seem to have Wolverine cornered, which makes it clear that they are looking for vengeance. These creatures, who were once human, blame Wolverine for their current state and for the most part, they are right. They ask Wolverine whether he even considers himself a man, leading Logan down the dark path of his memories. But he isn't really given much time to reflect as the creatures bring up their families. The treatment had made the victims night invulnerable, but when they went looking for their families, they were nowhere to be found. Before we can even register these horrifying facts, the creatures bring out Dakon's unconscious body and threaten him, knowing that he is Logan's son. This is when we begin to see glimpses of Dakon's past and learn that the boy was raised by Romulus after he murdered his adoptive parents. This chapter provides us with our first real look at the menacing ancestor of the Lupines, and if we are being honest, those protruding canines did have us cowering for a while. Anyway, we learn that for all his life, Dakon was trained by Romulus, who convinced the young boy that nobody apart from him really cared. Romulus trained Dakon for years, remaining in the shadows, leading Wolverine's son to the right place at the right time. We learned that in 1959, Dakon was enlisted into the Canadian Army, but ended up having the worst commanding officers. Mr. Burr, the CO at the camp, seems to be a sadist, while Frederick Hudson, the government official, is an unempathetic douchebag. In their very first encounter, Dakon watches as the hulking Burr takes out one of his comrades with a single punch. 9 months into the grueling training, Dakon disappears into the forest at Romulus' command, who then asks him to burn the entire camp to the ground. As expected, Dakon carries out his commands perfectly and slaughters everyone inside apart from Hudson. Though Hudson seems capable of taking down Dakon, he falters when he finds himself laughing uncontrollably. This exhibits one of Dakon's more underrated powers, the ability to manipulate his opponent's emotions using his pheromones. In the end, it's a pretty easy encounter for Dakon, who lets Hudson live so that Romulus can use the officer to gain information on adamantium. After this, Dakon found himself traveling from war to war until he became a perfect instrument of violence. Romulus always remained nearby, feeding the boy lies about his real father Wolverine. This fills Dakon with an unparalleled hatred for his father from a very young age, and Romulus promises Dakon that he will have his vengeance, but only if he remains by Romulus' side. Back at the facility, Wolverine finds himself torn by the idea of killing these tormented souls. However, he eventually comes to the conclusion that the only way to free these men would be death, and proceeds to do what is needed. However, as he wanders out into the tunnels, he realizes that the sense of all the other creatures have disappeared, and the only one remaining is his own son, Dakon. Even more concerning is the fact that the boy is suffering from memory loss, which makes him more dangerous than ever before. Making peace. The conflict between Wolverine and Dakon leads both men down a dark spiral that completely exhausts them both emotionally and mentally. However, the next clue regarding Romulus only comes at the very end of this fight in the pages of issue number 30. Here we find battered Wolverine standing against Dakon, with an unconscious Professor X lying between them. The professor ended up like this after a futile attempt at cracking Dakon's psyche when the psionic defense put in place by Romulus proved too much to breach through. After a brief exchange of words, Dakon rushes at his father with murderous intent, only to realize that Logan isn't really fighting back. He stabs and slices, but generates no response from Wolverine, which only ends up frustrating him more. Dakon keeps hacking at Logan in order to exact his revenge, and we see that Wolverine has all but given up. He is consumed with guilt regarding Dakon's mother's death, and keeps provoking him in an attempt to pay for his countless sins. Suddenly, Wolverine finds himself in a peaceful garden known as the Jasmine Falls. He remembers this place from his time in Japan, and we learn that this might be the only place where Logan felt peace. This is exactly where he saw Dakon's mother, Itsu, for the very first time. As if by magic, the woman appears beside our weary warrior and leads him deeper into the forest. She walks deeper into the forest towards a small cottage, the place where she had lost her life. Logan desperately tries to keep Itsu from entering the cottage, but it is inevitable. In the end, Logan follows her into the wooden structure. Inside, a shocking sight awaits him. He finds Professor X inside, waiting patiently to address his student. Turns out that Xavier, though unconscious, is still in complete control of his mental faculties. He tells Wolverine that Dakon's subconscious contained a trap placed there by Romulus, which knocked him out. Together, the teacher and student sit down to have a heartfelt conversation. Xavier tries to purge Logan of his all-consuming guilt and tries to get him to accept that Itsu's Itsu's death wasn't his fault. Romulus killed Itsu Logan, not you, the kind professor emphasizes. After this strangely beautiful moment, Xavier lets Dakin into the cottage because both Logan and Dakin are excessively focused on this singularly painful memory that they both share. For the first time in their lives, the father and the son have a peaceful conversation and try to reason with each other. Wolverine takes Dakin to Jasmine Falls, where he first saw the boy's mother. The boy's voice shakes as he is overcome with emotion, and he slowly begins to see beyond the lies Romulus has fed him. Though we were practically tearing up at this point, things just kept getting better. Wolverine and Dakin end up joining forces against the man who wronged them, the man who made them into weapons of hate and violence. Everything leads back to Romulus, and the Lupine ancestor genuinely has a lot to answer for. In the final pages, we see Dakin and Wolverine take a vow to kill Romulus, and honestly, we couldn't be more excited. Family business. The next chapter finds Dakin and Wolverine scouring the streets of Africa in order to get to Romulus. However, that's not easy, as the man has literally spent several lifetimes in hiding. In the war-torn region of Augica in North Africa, they finally begin to find the trail of a certain individual who might just lead them to Romulus. They chance upon the site of a recent skirmish between two tribes, and while they are still surveying the corpse-ridden streets, bullets come flying. Wolverine turns to find a small child wielding an assault rifle, but Dakin befriends the boy by offering him some chocolate. However, the danger is far from over, as a very familiar voice greets them from a distance. For those unfamiliar with the character, Cyber is the same army commander who tormented Dakin during his training. Moreover, he might just know the next step to finding Romulus. Though Dakin and Wolverine prepare for a fight, Cyber makes it evident that he's not here for violence, but to ensure that the Wolverine does not come at him. Cyber has brought along a small horde of child soldiers, which are sure to deter our noble hero. Cyber proposes a team-up, stating that he has his own scores to settle with Romulus. After all, it was Romulus who had him eaten alive by Deathwatch beetles to graft his skin with adamantium. Cyber tells him that he also confirmed Romulus's existence for Nick Fury, which must have definitely put him on the Lupine's hit list. However, Cyber also has some questions for Dakin and asks him where he saw Romulus last. After all, Dakin was one of the only characters to have direct encounters with the villain, despite their common goals. The negotiations between Cyber and the father-son duo break down, leading them on separate ways. Cyber leaves, but not without assuring Wolverine that they could find Romulus easily, but only if they worked together. Next, we see Dakin and Wolverine by the campfire, having a conversation about the strange encounter with Romulus. They both agree that though the man cannot be trusted, they do need his help. They hatch a plan that leads them right to Cyber's outpost. The place is being manned by a platoon of kids with assault rifles, and when Wolverine begins to approach them, all hell breaks loose. The kids riddle Logan with more holes than SpongeBob, but it turns out that our heroes have a final trick up their sleeve. Cyber, who is high up on a watchtower, discovers that Dakin has snuck up behind him, and by the time Wolverine comes to his senses, Dakin already has him hanging from a ceiling. Wolverine punches the villain in the face, but the man just smiles. It shocks Logan for a moment, but when a black claw slices through his throat, everything falls into place. Dakin towers over Logan, his hand red with his father's blood, and declares, "Sorry, Dad, but I think Cyber's plan is better." When Wolverine regains consciousness, he finds himself surrounded by Cyber's child army. This puts Wolverine in quite a strange conundrum, as he can't really make it out without hurting the children. We travel to a flashback from several days ago, where Cyber and Dakin are discussing their roles in Romulus' plan. Dakin believes that Professor X scrambled his memories by attempting to get in his head, and the boy could only get a hold of him when he met Cyber. Though most of his memories are still fragmented, Cyber decides to help him, and the two board a plane to an unknown location. Along the way, Cyber tells Dakin how he barely remembers the aftermath of the massacre at the training camp. We see flashes of Burr's limp body being shoved into a train car that already has Romulus and Victor Creed inside. Dakin and Cyber end up at the Glasso International Airport, where Dakin reveals that he is in possession of Wolverine's X-Men communicator. Though Cyber seems apprehensive, he settles down when Dakin tells him that as long as the device is online, the rest of the X-Men won't come after their beloved Wolverine. Back at Cyber's outpost, Wolverine is struggling to calm the children down. He tells them that bullets are useless against him, which freaks the kids out, but they still don't set Logan free. Finally, Wolverine is forced to break out of his bonds, which prompts the children to shoot him down, believing that they have finally killed him. The kids depart without realizing that Logan has already started healing. Many miles away in Saskatchewan, Canada, Cyber and Daken visit the place where Cyber's skin was bonded with adamantium. As this was the first attempt at bonding a human with adamantium, the process was extremely brutal and excruciating for Burr. Inside the dilapidated mansion, Cyber begins to feel a bit nervous as he senses the presence of another person. Meanwhile, Wolverine manages to make his way to the telephone, which he uses to contact his old friend, the friendly blue beast, Hank McCoy. He asks him for the coordinates of his communicator, which instantly alerts Daken to the fact that Wolverine is free. However, fractures are beginning to emerge between him and Cyber, making a brutal fight seem inevitable. We see that Wolverine has managed to get a ride on a private jet with some wealthy suits. Inside the barn, tensions between Daken and Cyber have reached the tipping point. When Cyber tries to force some information regarding Romulus, Daken, we learn that the youngster has some pretty nefarious ambitions. He belittles Cyber by telling him that he is just a failed prototype, while Daken himself is the inheritor to Romulus's throne. Enraged by this, Cyber tries to attack Daken, but it seems like Wolverine has already told him how to take Cyber down. By stealing the pills that keep Cyber's augmented body functioning, Daken kills the man without throwing a single punch. And though everything up until now has gone according to Logan's plan, Daken seems to have some more ulterior motives. Thus, when Logan gets to the barn, his son is nowhere to be found. In the final pages of the chapter, we find Wolverine in a bar, drinking his sorrows away. But then, a familiar voice calls out to him. Logan turns to find Nick Fury, who seems equally concerned about Daken's whereabouts. The X-Men versus the son of Wolverine. Over the course of the next few chapters, Wolverine and Nick Fury chase Daken as he embarks on his quest to become the leader of the Lupines. To achieve this, Daken decides to go after the Muramasa blade, as it is the only weapon capable of killing his father. However, since the blade is currently with Cyclops, it's certain the son of Wolverine would have to get past the X-Men to get to a mystical weapon. Thus, by the time we get to issue number 35, an encounter between Daken and Xavier's wards seems inevitable. Daken, a master of guerrilla tactics, manages to draw the X-Men out of their mansion into open battle. Then, using a series of brutal strategies, he was able to put the X-Men at a disadvantage and grab the blade from Cyclops. Fortunately, Wolverine manages to get to the spot in the nick of time, pun intended. Issue number 35 begins with another flashback. Wolverine reminisces about how Romulus had manipulated him from the very beginning. Though Logan had always felt his ominous presence since the beginning, the ancient mutant had managed to remain hidden in the shadows, pulling all the strings. Wolverine then thinks of the time he met the mystical swordsmith, Muramasa himself. The man was already a legend for the weapons he produced, but his final masterpiece was yet to come. Muramasa distilled the rage within Wolverine's heart. The master then extracted this rage in the form of a single drop of blood, which was then used to craft the fabled Muramasa blade. Now, centuries later, Wolverine found the same weapon being wielded against him by none other than his own son. As the fight between the father and the son begins, it's evident that Wolverine is at a significant disadvantage. Fortunately, Colossus intervenes and manages to stall for a while. Daken is, of course, infuriated by this and rushes to slice the X-Men to shreds, only to find a purple cloud all around him. With a familiar bamf, Nightcrawler kicks Daken in the head to knock him off his feet. However, before the teleporter can continue with his attack, his pre-existing wounds cripple him. Suddenly, Cannonball flies out of the nearby forest and carries Daken up into the air, freeing the Muramasa from his grip. Cyclops rushes to the weapon, but Daken is much faster. However, when Daken is obstructed by armor, a strange thing happens. Since armor's psionic shields are crafted from the memories of her ancestors, the Muramasa falters. A huge explosion knocks most people out, apart from Daken and Logan. They start toward the blade, but in the end, Daken uses his emotional manipulation to put Logan to sleep, taking advantage of his father's weakened state. When Wolverine finally wakes back up, he realizes that Daken has taken a small shard from the mythical weapon. After all, why would he carry around a whole samurai sword when all he really needed was a small piece? As the X-Men get back to their feet, the tensions between Logan and the rest of the team become apparent, and Wolverine is forced to go off on his own. In New York City, the old scientist Phineas Mason, also known as the Tinkerer, is speaking to an anonymous caller over a secure line. The man is in a wheelchair at the moment due to a spinal injury, away, but his brain is still just as sharp. Still, unbeknownst to him, a CCTV camera catches him in its field. And, well, Nick Fury is the kind of man who is always watching. Fury rushes to the city before Phineas Mason can meet the person who has gotten him into the Big Apple. Wolverine, who is already in New York, also starts approaching Mason. After all, Mason's one of the only 4 people on the planet who can perform the procedure Daken is looking for. However, when Wolverine makes his way into the men's room following Tinker's scent, he is no longer there. Instead, he finds a strange pair of boots peeking out from under one of the stalls. A massive hand knocks Logan down, and we find a gigantic figure looking down at our hero. This man is Victor Hudson, a blind and mute man who is allegedly the Devil's Child. Deep under the city, in a dilapidated subway tunnel, the Tinkerer finally meets the man who hired him. It's Daken, of course. A serious upgrade. After being knocked out by Romulus's henchman, Victor Hudson, Wolverine sinks into a terrible nightmare. He sees Daken being experimented upon in the same way it was done to him during the Weapon X program. At the end of this terrible ordeal, Logan sees that it's him conducting these experiments on Daken. Wolverine wakes back up to realize that Hudson is gone, and so is the Tinkerer. Then it dawns upon him. All of this was set up by Romulus in order to further provoke Daken into a lifetime of violence. The end goal is, of course, to turn Daken into a living weapon, just like his father once was. Wolverine gathers his wits and follows Hudson's scent into the streets. Inside the subway tunnels, the Tinkerer has just finished analyzing Daken's physiology. Turns out that he is built just like his estranged father, a true specimen of human evolution. Due to this, the Tinkerer comes to the conclusion that grafting the Muramasa blade on him would be a comparatively easy task. However, since the blade cannot be directly exposed to soft tissue, Daken would need to have an adamantium sheath inserted into his forearms. However, even if the procedure ended up being successful, the end result would be nowhere as efficient as Wolverine's blades. However, they would still be more than enough to kill his father. Wolverine chases Hudson's scent down the streets of New York to find him running into a dark alley. A furious fight ensues as Wolverine struggles against Hudson's inhumane strength. As the fight progresses, Wolverine finds himself getting more and more animalistic, to the point that he threatens an innocent cop who is just doing his job. However, Logan manages to stop himself at the last moment and rushes deeper into the subway tunnels after the villain. Inside the tunnel is a train that Hudson is desperately trying to board. It's also evident that someone far more important is on the same train. However, Wolverine realizes that to save Daken, he would have to let go of his demons for the moment, and he rushes in the opposite direction towards the Tinkerer's makeshift lab, but he's far too late. The procedure is complete, and Daken is now submerged in a tank. The moment Wolverine grabs hold of the Tinkerer, the glass shatters and Daken walks out. 2 shiny claws made out of Muramasa blade protrude out of his fists as he begins charging towards his father. Wolverine manages to pin his son down, and the boy becomes even more enraged when he learns that Logan let Romulus go willingly. In his anger, Daken stabs Wolverine in the heart, and for a moment, we almost believe that it is all over. But come on, it's not the comics, and nothing ever dies. We find Wolverine in Russia some 5 days later, alive and well. Turns out that Daken didn't really stab him with Muramasa blades, just his regular ones. However, Wolverine informs us that starting now, Romulus would be his sole focus due to what he did to his son. Many miles away, the psychopathic Omega Red is transferred to an under-equipped prison cell. Things are definitely going to get messier now that he's around. Seeing Red and the new Avenger. Inside the Vuktuki prison in Russia, the warden is perturbed by the increasing number of violent incidents occurring in the solitary confinement unit. This is due to the monstrous Omega Red, who has recently started calling the remote facility his home. However, the officials are helpless, as there's certainly something much larger at play here. Meanwhile, Wolverine is hunting down the underlings of the shady politician Konstantinov, and seems to have gotten increasingly more violent after the events inside the subway. Wolverine wants Konstantinov to release false broadcasts regarding his location in order to confuse Romulus. Logan has changed his approach to hunting Romulus and is now trying to best him at his own game. Since Daken has also split away from Romulus, Wolverine realizes that this might be one of the few times in his entire history when the ancient Lupine is truly vulnerable. However, Wolverine is unaware of Omega Red lurking in the bowels of a prison nearby, and, well, it only takes a little while for a prisoner with aides to talk the psychopath into murdering the entire prison. Of course, the hidden message from Romulus came in very handy. Romulus is also on the move and seems to be aboard a train talking to a police lieutenant who has just recovered a carbonadium synthesizer from a couple of small-time thugs. On the other hand, Wolverine has become aware of Romulus's fondness for trains, and while on the lookout in Krasnoyarsk, Logan spots the humongous Victor Hudson boarding one. The train stops in the middle of a snowy forest, and Victor departs. Wolverine follows him into an underground tunnel, which leads him directly into the prison complex. It's far too late by the time Wolverine realizes that the entire place is filled with corpses. The only things inside are a carbonadium synthesizer and his old nemesis, Red. By the time Wolverine realizes that this is an ambush, he is already caught up in Red's metallic tentacles. Meanwhile, things are shifting in the rest of the Marvel universe as well. Daken, who had gone out on his own, is offered the position of Avenger on Norman Osborn's new team. These new heroes aren't half as noble as the original ones, but this at least allows Daken to stay in the tower. We see him adjusting to the new life while still being torn by his past and the mysteries surrounding Romulus. The wayward anti-hero even manages to get into a fight with the Fantastic Four and survive. Now, that's definitely quite an achievement. The race to the top. As you probably expect, the fight between Wolverine and Omega Red is one of the most brutal encounters we have ever seen. They are both vicious fighters with healing powers, and thus it gets incredibly bloody at times. We learn that the only reason Omega Red is fighting Wolverine is to gain access to carbonadium synthesizer, which he desperately needs to survive. It also becomes evident that Omega Red is much more powerful than before, proving that Romulus has masterminded all of this. However, Wolverine is able to capitalize on Red's need for C-Synth and manages to escape by pinning him under a heavy prison door. Though he is successful, the battle with Red takes everything out of Wolverine, and he collapses in the snow just outside the prison. And well, there's someone there who is just looking for an opportunity like this. As Wild Child sneers at Wolverine's limp body, one can't help but feel afraid for Logan. Issue number 39 begins with Wolverine dangling over a pit of molten metal, completely at Wild Child's mercy. The villain sneers and mocks him, while Wolverine tries to make sense of the fact that Wild Child, Omega Red, and him are in the same place at the same time. He realizes that this coincidence is beyond chance, and that Romulus actually carefully planned out all of this. For some reason, the ancient mutant wants all the Lupine mutants to face off against each other. Wild Child agrees that he is finally asking the right questions, and tells Wolverine that Romulus carefully choreographed all his encounters throughout the storyline. After all, the first Lupine seemed to be getting old, and it was necessary for him to determine the most worthy successor. Thus, he pits all these warriors against each other, always watching every fight closely from the shadows. But unfortunately for Wolverine, it seems that this time, Wild Child come out on top. Just as Wild Child is about to dunk Logan into the metal, Omega Red breaks through the walls, chasing after the C-Synth, which is now in Wild Child's possession. They fight for it, and Wolverine uses the opportunity to make his escape. Logan falls into the molten, using his forearms as support, and is somehow able to scramble out of the pit. Though Wild Child tries his best to stand against Omega Red's overwhelming strength, and eventually ends up succumbing to his tentacles. Red rips through Will Child's chest and flings him into the burning pit. There's definitely something poetic about that. 2 days after the brutal encounter, we find Wolverine in a secret warehouse talking to Black Widow about a secret package. This is where we are also told of Romulus's original plan regarding Wolverine. Though Romulus had managed to control Wolverine from the shadows all his life, he could no longer reach Logan after he joined the X-Men. He had to go in this roundabout way to make Wolverine his successor. Wolverine's contemplation is interrupted when Black Widow warns him of Omega Red approaching him. However, Wolverine remains unfazed. As he expects the murderer's arrival, Wolverine unveils the Muramasa blade and warns Red to stay away. However, Omega Red is consumed by the idea of becoming the next Romulus and even threatens Daken. This proves to be the last straw for Logan, who prepares for a fight. Omega Red remains overconfident in his skills until Wolverine hurls the blade into his chest, killing him in a single blow. With his dying breath, Omega Red asks Wolverine if the weapon could even kill Romulus. Wolverine answers yes, but a cold voice behind them disagrees. Wolverine turns to find a humongous figure approaching him. The man towers several feet over our hero, and and bears an uncanny resemblance to him. Each of his hands has 5 metal claws protruding from them, making it clear that the man before Logan is a Lupine. It seems that the fearsome Romulus, the ancient progenitor of the Lupines, has finally chosen to reveal himself. The first wolf. After a long and arduous journey, Wolverine finally stands before the man behind most of his misfortunes. The Canadian was never really known for his patience, so he charges straight at Romulus, the Muramasa blade swinging wildly. Romulus taunts Wolverine for his stubbornness and proves his power with just a couple of solid blows that send Logan crashing to the ground. By the time he gets to his feet, Romulus sneaks off into the darkness and surprises Logan with a brutal slice from behind. Logan's considerably wounded by the first few exchanges, but carries on even after the Muramasa is knocked away. Using his adamantium claws, he drowns Romulus under a constant barrage of ferocious slices that are finally able to draw blood. After recovering from the blows, Romulus belittles Wolverine by telling him that he's so good with his claws because it was Romulus who taught him the skills from the shadows. Once again, we hear him say, "I am what you will become." Romulus uses his gauntlets to dig into Wolverine's shoulders, but despite the excruciating pain, Wolverine manages to use it to his advantage. He grabs one of the claws to hold Romulus in place and delivers a hard blow to his head. Then, freeing himself from Romulus's grasp, he begins to taunt the supervillain. Wolverine tells Romulus how the recent encounter with Wildchild had alerted him to Romulus's ultimate goal, but the fact that he was looking for a successor confirmed that the prehistoric mutant wasn't immortal. Instead, he was just scared of losing his control over the world. The words seem to get under Romulus's skin, and Wolverine is able to destroy one of his deadly gauntlets. The battle goes on until both participants are completely drenched in blood, but it appears that Wolverine is finally gaining the upper hand. But that's when Romulus starts explaining one of the most horrifying aspects of his plan. He tells Wolverine that he has no choice apart from vying for the top spot, as someone naturally needs to be on the top of the food chain. As it stands at the moment, there are only 2 alternatives: Wolverine and Daken. Thus, according to Romulus's design, it's inevitable that one would eventually kill the other. This stops Wolverine from killing Romulus, but not before he assures the villain that he will burn his entire kingdom down. As Wolverine is retreating, Romulus finds his moment and hurls the deadly Muramasa blade at Logan. We suddenly see Wolverine emerging from the depths of Jasmine Falls. Beside him sits Itsu, and the man relives the horrifying memory of his wife meeting her end in the quaint wooden cottage. We come back to the battlefield to find Romulus towering over Wolverine. However, our hero didn't die, as it was the hilt of the sword that hit him. Romulus, who is equally injured, leaves Wolverine with the sword, but not before checking the effectiveness of the weapon by cutting his thumb. Turns out the mystical weapon can really kill him. It's certain that we will see the monster very soon in the future. New alliances. The next time we see Wolverine, he is still reeling from his loss to Romulus. However, the defeat has given him some pretty important lessons. Logan understands that Romulus knows him incredibly well and could probably see through any plan he made. Also, the fact that he is equally in control of the unpredictable Daken makes it an even more volatile situation. Thus, Logan has decided to call on his old friend Bruce Banner. However, as longtime fans of the character probably know, Hulk's relationship with Wolverine has always been rocky. Wolverine approaches Bruce, who seems to be living in isolation in a scrapyard. Wolverine tries to recruit Banner in his fight against Romulus, but Banner flat out declines. He states that he has renounced that part of his life, and the only thing he is good for anymore is physics lessons. Wolverine, of course, is as stubborn as ever, and tries to bring the bug guy out by punching Banner in the face. Though the Green Goliath never comes out, someone similar sneaks up on the duo. Wolverine realizes his mistake, but only too late. The intruder turns out to be Scar, Hulk's estranged son. He hurls an old car at Wolverine, knocking the X-Man to the ground. Next, Scar brings down his gigantic sword, flinging Logan with such fury that it reminds him of his past encounters with the original Hulk. Scar then brings his fist down on Wolverine's head, knocking him deep into the ground. However, the young warrior is certainly confused when Wolverine is perfectly fine. Banner tells his son of the indestructible adamantium embedded within Logan's bones that even a Hulk can't really damage. Wolverine and Banner share a pretty heartfelt moment about their newfound responsibilities as fathers, but in the end, Banner refuses to join Logan's cause. Scar then kicks Logan many miles up in the air, sending him flying toward an unknown destination. Many miles away, a father and son on a camping trip see something really unusual. A man in bright yellow spandex stuck on a tree, but not in the conventional way. Well, basically the top of a pine tree has penetrated through Wolverine's abdomen, rendering him practically immobile. Despite the excruciating pain, Wolverine manages to cut the trunk off and find a way to the ground. By the time the father and the son reach Wolverine, he seems to be breathing, but gravely injured. However, the son seems really wary of Wolverine, as he's a mutant, and calls 911. Thankfully, the father is a compassionate man and offers to take Logan home in order to heal. However, the son still calls up the authorities, and as we all know, Romulus has plenty of ears everywhere in the government. He gets a whiff of Wolverine's whereabouts, and the chase is on. Wolverine wakes up in a barn to the sirens of police vehicles. As he dons the costumes, Logan wonders whether all sons are just the same, total jerks. In any case, he's forced to abandon the farm and make his way out while a small fleet of police vans is hot on his trail. The police officers manage to get pretty close, but Logan is saved just in time by a bright green savior. Though it took some time, it seems like Banner and Scar have finally decided to join forces with Logan against the fearsome Romulus. After the rescue, Banner narrates his own problems to Wolverine. Turns out that Banner is just as worried about his son due to the fact that Scar has organically inherited Hulk's powers. This makes him all the more volatile, and we see the regretful Banner plead with Wolverine to keep his son from making the same mistakes that he did. Despite this, Banner seems content to join forces with Wolverine at the moment. As Scar lands behind him, Logan realizes that this is going to be one tumultuous partnership. Next, Logan heads up to Utopia, the headquarters of the X-Men. In truly characteristic fashion, Logan resists any attempts at questioning until the rest of his team is forced to turn their backs on him. However, there is one particular mutant whose gifts Logan really needs in this dark hour. He calls out to the teleporter cloak and manages to convince the young mutant with an outrageously risky plan. Many miles away, in Yokohama, Japan, the Silver Samurai, where the warrior is in a heated discussion with some executives regarding an alliance with the Hand. The samurai, always honorable, disagrees with this proposition, which leads the executives to resort to some really violent means. However, before the ninjas can get to the leader of Clan Yashida, Wolverine pops up out of nowhere, though he is still reeling from Cloak's teleportation and is literally covered in his own puke. He doesn't waste much time before getting to work. The ninja from the Hand attacks Wolverine, but all in vain. Even though Logan stops himself from using his lethal claws, the old Berserker still proves too much for the puny ninjas. Seeing their henchmen get beat up, the men in the suits plead with the Silver Samurai to come to their aid. The samurai assures them that he will enter the fight, but not for them. He has his own scores to settle with the infamous Gaijin. As soon as the samurai enters the battle, Wolverine softens his blows and pleads with the warrior to hear him out. But since Wolverine literally cut off the man's hand the last time they saw each other, it does take some convincing before the samurai comes around. Thanks to a timely intervention by Cloak, Wolverine is finally able to make the angry warrior listen. He pulls out the Muramasa and pleads with the master swordsman to teach him the ways of the katana in order to defeat Romulus. Romulus seems to be aware of all this, quietly keeping watch from the shadows. When the executives from the Hand finally make it out of the Yashida's stronghold, they are promptly struck down by a small platoon of police officers, all under Romulus' grip. In the final pages of the chapter, Romulus accepts that Logan is finally beginning to chip away at the ancient mutants' empire. Moreover, Romulus still seems to be clueless about Wolverine's true plan, which will definitely be a huge factor in their inevitable encounter. The Great Escape. After completing his training and learning the secrets of the Muramasa, Wolverine leaves Japan in order to move further in his quest for vengeance. This leads him to the high-security prison where the criminal Ruby Thursday is being kept. However, our heroes soon realize that getting in is way easier than getting out would be. As soon as Wolverine and Cloak manage to get Ruby out of his cell, the alarms go off. A small army of prison guards come after our heroes, but even more concerning is the fact that their warden is just another pawn in in Romulus's clutches. He informs the murderous Lupine of Wolverine's break-in, and a strangely ominous smile spreads across Romulus's face when he learns that Logan is at the facility to free Ruby. Still, for the moment, it feels like everything is going according to plan. The normal guards pose no threat to our heroes, while their backup from the Hammer Command is still to arrive. Banner, who is playing the role of the man in the chair from the shadows, hacks all the cameras in the facility and convinces the poor guards that his son, Scar, is the assigned backup. This leads the officers to basically welcome Scar into their facility, unaware that he is there to assist Wolverine in the escape. By the time the real backup arrives in the form of the Olympian god, Ares, the team has already managed to regroup. However, leading a group of highly volatile renegades is never really easy, and Ares' arrival serves as the perfect distraction. Scar chooses to forfeit the plan and engages Ares in a slugfest, which forces Wolverine to send Ruby away using Cloak's teleportation. However, he now finds himself stuck inside the prison with two literally behemoths tearing the place to shreds. Somehow, Wolverine is able to convince Scar to make his escape, and the duo finally makes it to the waterfront where Cloak had taken Ruby. But unfortunately, it's too late. Wolverine and Scar find an injured Cloak limping toward them, and the fear in his voice reveals that Romulus has played his hand. On the final page of the issue, we see Romulus towering over Ruby's unconscious body, angrily calling out to the master criminal. Romulus tries to persuade Ruby to join his side, but the cunning criminal doesn't really need much convincing. The next day, Ruby approaches Wolverine in a dark alley. He tries to have a conversation with Ruby, and she tries her best to lie her way out, but when Wolverine smells Romulus on her, there is only one conclusion to draw. Ruby doesn't react well to her secret being revealed and tracks Wolverine with a bunch of tentacles popping out of her head. She also confesses that she sold Wolverine out to Romulus after the latter threatened her daughter, and after that, there's nothing much left to say. The conflict descends into a full-on fistfight, and though Wolverine tries not to use lethal force, he is eventually forced to draw out his claws. Despite this, he ends up getting grievously injured and is forced to call in his new team, which consists of Scar, Banner, Silver Samurai, and Cloak. The group battles it out, and Ruby finds herself overwhelmed by their continuous and well-coordinated attacks. Finding an opportune moment, Cloak teleports her back to the prison, which must definitely be heartbreaking for the career criminal. Wolverine tells the others that Romulus is now aware of their plan, which certainly makes them a bit uneasy. But our scheming Canadian has another trick up his sleeve, as he tells the others that all of this was just misdirection. This whole ruse to get Ruby out was concocted by her lover, a man who goes by The Answer. However, knowing that Ruby would waste literally no time betraying him, Lon was forced to call in yet another old rival. As Wolverine rushes through the city streets and into a dilapidated apartment, we find the real Answer staring back at us, dressed in bright red. Well, as you can probably guess by now, it's Deadpool, the murderous merc with a mouth. The son's journey. In order to really grasp the intricacies of Wolverine's plan, we will now have to take a short trip to his son, Daken. All this while, Daken has mostly been involved in adventures of his own alongside Norman Osborn's New Avengers. However, the more he fights, the darker his thoughts get. He finds himself thinking about the pain he has suffered and starts believing that it is his true destiny to take Romulus's place. By the time we get to issue No. 85 in the Dark Wolverine saga, things are worse than ever before. The issue begins with a flashback. It's a conversation between Daken and Logan from 2 weeks ago. Though the dark thoughts are still swirling inside Daken's head, he agrees to see his old man and hear him out. Wolverine reveals his plan to defeat Romulus. Strangely, Daken seems to like it. Before Wolverine leaves, Daken reminds his father that once Romulus is out of the way, it will be time for them to settle their personal difference. At present, Daken is sitting at a street-side cafe in Ankara. Wolverine, who seems to be passing by, catches sight of his son and is extremely surprised. After all, it's not really the correct time for him to show up according to the plan. Moreover, Daken seems unfazed by his father's displeasure and just goes on to reveal that he betrayed Logan. About a week ago, Romulus found Daken in a hotel room located in Paris. After quickly killing the lady accompanying him, Romulus convinces Dakin that it is his side that he truly belongs to. Wolverine might want to kill Romulus, but Dakin really just wants to be like him. Thus, it's pretty easy for Romulus to win Dakin over to his side. Dakin basically spills all the beans, laying out Wolverine's plan in excruciating detail before the enemy. But it seems like Wolverine has learned a lot from his past betrayals. Though he seems to lose it for just a second, Logan quickly settles down. In a remorseful voice, Logan tells Dakin that his hatred for his father springs from the fact that he truly loves Romulus, and that's not really something one can fix. Wolverine then reveals that Romulus already knew of the plan leaked by him, as even Ruby had fed him the same information. Now, he just had a confirmation from his most trusted source, and this would lead Romulus to proceed without caution, and that's exactly what Logan was looking for. Dakin realizes his grave mistake and hangs his head in shame. But before Logan leaves, the son asks his father one last question: "What else don't I know?" In response, Wolverine simply stabs his son in the chest with a katana and tells him that it is a surprise. Where does your power come from? Dakin's stabbing leads us directly to issue number 47 from the Wolverine Origins Saga. Since the act occurred in a public place, the entire street has been thrust into chaos. One of the responding officers, yet another pawn of Romulus's, informs the Lupine of the crime. By the time the phone call was over, Wolverine has already disappeared. Romulus asks his henchmen to follow the ambulance carrying Dakin. However, while turning at a traffic intersection, the officer's car is struck by an unmarked van, which blows the entire thing up. This causes the ambulance driver to turn back to help the victims of the accident. From a nearby rooftop, Wolverine is keeping a careful eye on all the bloody events. It only takes a short while for Romulus to show up, but the Lupine finds his way obstructed by Scar. To our surprise, it seems as if the two already know each other. We travel to a flashback from 6 days ago to find a solitary Scar resting in the middle of a cold forest. A dark figure approaches him with a promising offer. Romulus shows himself and states that he knows everything about what Scar wants, including how to get it. Romulus convinces Scar that he knows all of the Hulk's secrets, and he seems willing to share, but only if Scar can provide him with all the details regarding Wolverine's plan. Romulus tells Scar that his desire to battle the Hulk is extremely similar to Romulus's own desire to fight Wolverine. Despite this, the first Lupine finds his descendants' methods unworthy, and he asks for Scar's help to ensure a fair battle. The scene cuts off abruptly, leaving the audience in the dark. Back in the present, Wolverine and Cloak notice that Scar isn't attacking Romulus as he's supposed to. Instead, the two seem to be having a conversation. In a pretty exciting twist, Scar declines Romulus's offer by telling him the reason why he wants to battle Hulk and not Banner. The son of the Hulk considers himself to be an equal to Banner already, and due to this, it's not as easy to fool him. After all, he also inherited Banner's fierce intellect. He pounces upon Romulus, but their battle is interrupted by a stray bazooka. Wolverine turns to find a horde of Kurdish fighters standing on the roof across and deduces that Romulus must have paid them for their participation. Due to the presence of these mercenaries, it seems as if Romulus is hell-bent on turning the entire street into a horror show. Scar takes on the Kurdish fighters, whose weapons are no match for the behemoth's inhuman strength. Scar almost gives into his anger and is about to tear the soldiers from limb to limb, but is topped by Cloak at the very last second. Despite Cloak's attempt at stopping the fight, a suicide bomber among the Kurds sets off an explosive that blows up the entire building. At this point, Wolverine is forced to make a very difficult choice. He can either save the civilians or take on his mortal enemy. Like a true hero, Logan chooses the former and turns his back on Romulus. This act of selflessness disgusts Romulus, but his contemplation is interrupted by Dakin, who seems to have healed completely. Of course, this is pretty shocking, as Dakin is stabbed by the deadly Muramasa blade, but Romulus only takes a moment to come to the conclusion that it is a false blade. Dakin confirms Romulus's doubt that Wolverine has just been playing him all this time. While Wolverine and his time rescue the victims from the bombed building, Dakin tells Romulus that Wolverine's final plan is to draw him out from the shadows and expose him, as most of Romulus's power and influence comes from the fact that he has managed to remain hidden throughout human history. Once he is forced out of the shadows, he would just be another mutant. Fearing that this would essentially leave nothing for him to inherit, Dakin switches to Romulus's side against his father. The end of the road. As Wolverine and Scar stand against Daken and Romulus, a bloody fistfight seems inevitable. The fight spills onto the streets as they land blow after blow against each other. Daken takes in his father in a fight that's both physically and emotionally exhausting, while Scar tests his skills against the formidable First Wolf. Romulus taunts Scar, making the Green Giant angrier than we've ever seen him before by calling him a half-breed. They crash through buildings and cars, leaving the entire city looking like an active war zone. Thus, it was only a matter of time before the army made its way to the conflict. For a moment, we see the fear in the soldiers' eyes as they embark on this suicidal mission to engage with literal monsters. They first find Scar, who starts taking the soldiers down indiscriminately owing to his anger. The gunfire has no effect on him, and it appears that the poor soldiers are marching towards certain death. On the other side of the battlefield, Daken and Wolverine are both struggling to gain the upper hand. They charge towards each other in an attempt to deal the finishing blow, but before their claws can dig into each other, Cloak transports Wolverine to a rooftop. Looking down upon the devastated streets, Wolverine realizes that both his son and Romulus have managed to escape. Wolverine looks at Scar, going on a complete rampage against the soldiers before finally leaping into the sky to escape. In a quiet voice, he murmurs, "This is all my fault." However, Cloak reminds Wolverine that there are more important matters to worry about. The next day, Romulus and Daken recuperate inside a hotel situated in Damascus, Syria. Daken reveals how he dreamt about the end of the world. He then goes off to see Romulus, who is drinking in hiding. Seeing his protege walk in, Romulus explains how he has lived through all of history, becoming a god to the cavemen. The prehistoric hunters believed Romulus to be a god of war, revering for his strength and power. He laments the fact that in this modern era, gods had been forgotten, and thus he was forced to build his empire from the shadows. According to him, the easiest way to remain in power was to stay hidden. In response, Daken says something really unexpected, "And the easiest way for me to remain hidden is to kill you." After this surprising declaration, Daken lunges at his mentor, stabbing him squarely in the chest. Romulus kneels down, bleeding profusely, while Daken reveals that Wolverine had no intention of exposing him. In fact, Daken remained clueless about his father's plans. When Romulus asks why he is doing this, Daken simply replies that he is fulfilling his duty as a worthy successor, and also he didn't want his father to have the honor of killing the first of their kind. Through the pain, Romulus whispers how Daken could have learned something from his father, a man who had managed to cultivate immense power without ever meaning to. This angers Daken to such an extent that he pops out his Muramasa claws to deal the final blow. But before Daken can bring his fist down, Romulus is carried away by an unseen intruder. When the dust settles, there's only one person for Daken to blame: Wolverine. A tale of forgiveness. In the final issue of this storied saga, we learn that it was Cloak who teleported Romulus from under Daken's nose. The trio now stand at the gates of the mansion where it all began, the dilapidated Howlett estate near Alberta, Canada. Wolverine, who was once known as James Howlett, was born in these very halls, and it was also here that he took his very first life. In a strange vision, Romulus sees Wolverine decapitating him with Muramasa blade, but in reality, Logan hasn't moved an inch. Romulus urges Wolverine to finish the job by killing him, but Logan has something else planned entirely. After a lifetime of killing almost every individual who stood against him, Wolverine finally realized the error of his ways. Thus, the Berserker now decides that he would wait for Romulus to die naturally, but this would undoubtedly be a pretty long wait. However, Logan has just the solution. He introduces Romulus to Cloak's Darkfold dimension, where the first Lupine will be doomed to spend the rest of his life. A black void, filled with emptiness, would now be his only empire. Before Wolverine can cloak and go back to the real world, Romulus threatens that this is not his end. But for the moment, he remains in the darkness, helpless and alone. When Wolverine finally gets back to the real world, he takes a moment to pay his respects. He wanders into his family's mansion and looks at the cracked doors and windows lining the facade. He thinks of how vengeance has consumed him his entire life, and the only way to move past it would be to forgive himself. Now, standing at the doors of the mansion where it all began, Logan finally finds it it within himself to do the unthinkable. In a moment that literally got us all teary-eyed, the lone Berserker forgives himself for all the mindless acts of violence he committed in the past. After all, he himself was a victim. With that, Logan is finally ready to face his estranged son. Unlike Wolverine, Daken actually has a long way to go before he can gain forgiveness. Cloak teleports Wolverine to his son in Budapest, where the two ready themselves for a final fight. As Daken unveils his Muramasa claws, it's evident that the boy fully intends to kill his father. The battle between the two warriors is as bloody as it gets OS. Despite the threat posed by Daken's lethal claws, Wolverine calls upon his training with the Silver Samurai to change his approach. Instead of fighting against the things he hates, Logan would fight for the things he loves. He matches Daken, blow for blow, exhibiting some amazing new skills with the katana. But Daken notices that his father isn't really going for the killing strike. This angers him further, and the battle stretches on. Eventually, Daken finds himself at a disadvantage as his Muramasa claws are not as stable as Logan's adamantium ones. This renders them unusable after the long exchanges. At one point, Daken basically accepts defeat and provokes his father into dealing the final blow. This is when Logan reveals that we wouldn't be killing his son, and neither did he kill Romulus. Though Daken is still filled with hatred, Wolverine uses the opportunity to remove the Muramasa blades embedded in his son's wrists, setting him free. In the final pages of this chapter, we see Wolverine bury Daken's claws as well as the Muramasa sword on a hill near his family's mansion. For the first time in Logan's history, the man seems to be completely at peace. However, if the comics have taught us anything, it's that peace never really lasts. But at least for the moment, Logan has ensured that Daken will not have the same violent fate as him. Daken's demons. The next time we see Romulus, it's in a flashback. This occurs in the pages of issue number 3 in the Daken, Dark Wolverine, where our heroes are being hunted down by a demon-possessed Wolverine. After being cast into hell, Logan's body became possessed by a bloodthirsty demon, hell-bent on destroying everything Wolverine ever loved. Unfortunately, this list includes the Dark Wolverine, Daken, who ends up being burned to a crisp due to the demon's hellfire. In what appears to be his last moments, Daken thinks of a conversation he once had with Romulus. Back when he was still a child, the duo sits atop a grassy hill somewhere in rural Japan. Romulus tells Daken of his greatest strength and weakness. He explains to the young boy that due to his innate nature, he would always be doomed to be alone. Due to this, he would eventually be overwhelmed by humanity's overwhelming numbers, just like Romulus was. He convinces the young Daken that the only way to gain strength would be to remain in the shadows. This would help him to be everywhere and nowhere all at once, enabling him to accumulate great power. However, this would mean a lifetime of being alone, which is clearly something that Daken doesn't look forward to. The fact that Daken sees his mentor even in his unfortunate state is a testament to how heavy Romulus's legacy bears upon him. The return of the first wolf. Since a man like Romulus is never easy to put down, we see him back in action during the events of Wolverine Volume 2, issue number 310. The comic begins with Wolverine climbing up the Empire State Building, using just his claws to rescue Cloak, who has been constrained at the very top of the building. Wolverine manages to cut Cloak down, but the man seems to be completely out of energy, which means that they are crashing straight into the ground below. Fortunately, a mention of Cloak's partner Dagger helps him snap out of it, and he teleports Wolverine to a snowy hill. It turns out that the one threatening Cloak's life is none other than Sabretooth, but this doesn't really make any sense, as Wolverine decapitated the monster with his own hands, using the Muramasa blade. Upon digging up Sabretooth's corpse, Wolverine notices a distinct scent that he hasn't experienced for quite some time. He looks back at Cloak, who reluctantly reveals the whole truth. Though it was Sabretooth who came for the couple, it wasn't just some random crime. He wanted Cloak to free Romulus in exchange for Dagger, so the teleporter did exactly that. Despite this, they didn't let Dagger just to make sure that Clack called Dagger for help. Suddenly, a loud scream rings out. It comes from the direction of the cottage where Sabretooth killed Wolverine's former lover, Silver Fox. Upon entering the cottage, all of Wolverine's fears prove to be true, as we see that Romulus really is back from the Dark Force dimension. Thankfully, Dagger is still alive, and Wolverine lunges at his prehistoric ancestor to free the woman. The battle is bloody and brutal, taking a great toll on both parties. Suddenly, as Romulus is about to land a vicious blow, he is stabbed in the back by a woman with brilliant red hair. She takes the battered Wolverine into her arms and kisses him deeply. She also also whispers the Weapon X Project in Logan's ears in Japanese but with an Italian accent. The voice seems strangely familiar. By the time Wolverine comes to his senses, both Romulus and the mysterious woman are gone. Logan's search for answers leads him to the familiar territory of the Weapon X Project. Though he destroyed most of the facility during his last visit, Wolverine soon discovers that a secret chamber managed to survive underground. Inside are numerous chambers with a multitude of saber-tooth clones ready for deployment. Before Logan even fully grasps the sight ahead of him, one of the saber-tooths breaks out to attack him. The second ancestor, Wolverine, struggles to fight against the horde of saber-tooths, but somehow manages to make his way out. Despite getting onto an aircraft, the legion of saber-tooths don't stop their chase. They latch onto the aircraft and eventually end up bringing it down. Wolverine tried to keep them away, but the crash had already wounded him grievously. For a moment, it almost feels as if this is the end of the road for Logan, but once again, his mysterious savior shows up. The red-haired woman uts down a couple of creeds with a large sword and throws another to Wolverine. Together, they are able to hold off the saber-tooths until Wolverine eventually comes up with a plan. Hurling his sword into a flammable vent, he sets the entire facility on fire. As they get to the exteriors of the Weapon X facility, a helicopter takes them to safety. Inside, another secret awaits Logan. The woman he was saved by is actually Romulus's identical twin, Remus, and, well, she has some differences of her own to settle. In the next issue, we see Wolverine and Remus quickly strike up a bond. Though they exchange some blows, probably out of habit, it becomes evident that they are both marching towards the same goal. On top of that, Remus appears to be completely familiar with Romulus's plan and explains that the entire thing about Lupines evolving from the wolves was just a ploy. Romulus orchestrated this entire thing, which caused the feral gene to become oddly common among mutants. He was the one who planted the elephant bones in Wakanda while looking for traces of vibranium in order to create a new kind of adamantium. And now that he has complete access to it, his plans are closer to completion than ever before. Wolverine leads a small team consisting of Remus, Cloak, Dagger, and himself to Romulus's hideout on the Amalfi Coast. Here, the team is immediately attacked by more clones of Sabretooth. Wolverine and Sabretooth battle it out in the mansion, eventually emerging into a secret chamber. Here, surrounded by the finest technology in the world, Romulus has managed to embed adamantium into his own skeleton. As the metal claws pop out of his enemy's fist, Wolverine realizes that this battle will be more complicated than he ever imagined. After all, Romulus has finally made good on his promise by becoming exactly the same as Wolverine. "I am what you will be," Romulus states condescendingly. The final battle. Wolverine finds himself facing off against the most powerful version of Romulus to ever exist. And to make matters worse, Sabretooth joins the fistfight. The two of them tear into Wolverine, and he finds himself thinking about how Romulus had manipulated him into thinking that his involvement in the Weapon X project was all his own doing. With frightening power, Romulus drives one of his new adamantium claws into Wolverine's head, and Logan finds himself drifting into a memory he doesn't recall. In the memory, Logan accompanies Romulus, Remus, and Sabretooth to the Weapon X project. Romulus seeks to take over the facility to create the perfect genetic specimen using the equipment at the Weapon X Center. It is revealed that the Weapon X project was basically Canada's attempt at the Super Soldier program. However, it would be Logan who would serve as Steve Rogers in this case. Wolverine swiftly dispatches a small team of mutant guards and begins to head inside of his own volition. But before he does so, he hands the sword over to Remus, as the couple is clearly in love. The vision is extremely believable, but Logan snaps out of it after realizing that it is another one of Romulus's mind tricks, the second ancestor. As Wolverine finds his feet, the rest of his team gathers behind him. Wolverine tells Romulus that his favorite catchphrase, Quod Sum Eris, is actually a grave mark, the last laugh from a rotting corpse. The battle heats up even further as all the heroes attack Romulus and Sabretooth together. Through their combined efforts, they are finally able to overwhelm the villains, which leads Sabretooth to resort to a pretty stupid plan. He blows up a hidden explosive, which sends everyone flying into the ocean. Sabretooth manages to survive, but Romulus isn't that lucky. Due to the added weight of his newly minted adamantium bones, Romulus finds himself helpless in the deep waters. However, in his last moments, he makes one final moment to take Wolverine out with him, but that doesn't really go well. In the end, Wolverine manages to capture the mutant and put him in a high-security prison aboard the raft. In the aftermath of the battle, we see that the reason Remus and Romulus split is because of the former's affection toward Logan. Since she wanted her brother to set Logan free, they were forced to part ways with each other. Romulus then made sure that everything involving Remus was wiped clean from Logan's head. However, at the moment, the lovers are at peace, vacationing together on an undisclosed island in the South Pacific. I guess there are happy endings after all. Romulus's legacy. Over the years, we have seen Romulus repeatedly appear in flashbacks for both Wolverine and Daken. He remains a crucial figure in their storylines and has made appearances in books like Origins of Marvel Comics and Lives of Wolverine, which feature these characters' backstories. The fact that he has become such an important part of these characters' story arcs is a testament to the longevity of Romulus as a character. Despite these appearances, Romulus has not yet had the opportunity to make a complete return, but since it's the comics we are talking about, I guess there will always be hope for that. Romulus's most recent encounter with Wolverine occurred in 2022's X Lives of Wolverine, where Logan must save his mentor, Charles Xavier, from being assassinated by Omerg's Red, who is traveling through time. Due to this, Wolverine is forced to revisit some of the most gruesome memories of his past using the Cerbero. During one of the numerous battles strewn all across this time-hopping storyline, Wolverine finds himself back in post-war Japan. Here, Omega Red takes possession of Itsu. Wolverine is reluctant to kill his lover as she bears their future child. Wolverine is still contemplating this when Romulus suddenly interrupts his fight with Itsu. He's there to kill Itsu as per the current timeline, but the addition of Omega Red in the situation disrupts the delicate balance. Wolverine faces off again against Romulus and manages to drive the villain away. In the process, Omega Red's hold on Itsu seems to recede, and for a brief moment, the tragic lovers are united. At least in the multiverse, there's always hope for closure. Marvelous verdict. Romulus perfectly embodies everything that Wolverine has been struggling with ever since the character's inception. He's not only the perfect foil to Logan, but also exhibits what the man could become had he not been taken in by Professor X at the correct time. Though some of the character's actions can be seen as a bit over the top, they still provide our hero with very interesting opportunities to get ahead of his violent past and murderous tendencies. Despite not having the most satisfying end to his story, Romulus is undoubtedly one of Wolverine's most recognizable villains, and since the man has remained hidden for most of his life, he might just fit pretty well into the current MCU landscape. However, only time will tell whether this fearsome warrior will ever make it onto the big screen. That's it for this one, but do tell us what you thought of Wolverine's ancestor down in the comments below. Also, don't forget to hit the subscribe button to stay up to date with all our marvelous content. Well then, goodbye dear viewers, and we will catch you all in the next one.